This evening I'd like to consider with you the night before 3 Christmases. No, I'm not thinking of Dickens's Christmas Carol. Those aren't the ones I have in mind. But I think that they may shed some light on the occasion tomorrow. The first was the night before the first Christmas, that real Christmas when Christ came into the world, where he stepped down step by step upon the galaxies, and that star over Bethlehem, said one, was but the jeweled sandal on his feet as he stepped down into a manger in Bethlehem, that night of all nights. And indeed, in a very real sense, it was night. It was most certainly night, and how dark was that night that hung over the world. In Judaism, the great hopes of the prophets had largely been forgotten. The teachings of the Old Testament had been perverted. Legalism of the Pharisees was rampant in the land, and the skepticism of the Sadducees perverted the rest. And truly, the revelation of the Old Testament had been harshly dealt with by man. And in the rest of the world, it was even worse. There was a dark night of heathenism that hung like a pall over the rest of the world, and how dark that was. The great Philip Schaff, the historian of Yale, said it very well: the entire history of mankind before his coming can be seen as nothing other than a preparation for his advent into the world. All history since his coming has simply been the unfolding of the progress of his Spirit in the hearts of men and the establishment of his kingdom in the world. And how true that is. And we see that both internally and externally. Internally, man's situation had gotten worse and worse. The heathen religion as well had degenerated. The golden age of Homer and the belief in the Greek gods of Zeus and Hera and all of the rest had long since passed. It's now 1,000 years old. And in Rome the same thing was true. There were few that sought the shrine of Jupiter and Juno anymore. In fact, skepticism reigned in the world, and the gods of the Greeks and the Romans had become a laughingstock. And after all, why should one believe in such a God anyway? For one thing was absolutely certain in heathenism, and that is that no God ever loved a human being. They destroyed them, they toyed with them, but they certainly didn't love them. Occasionally, in their lust, they would take a woman unto them. And consequently, no man ever loved a God. The thought was ludicrous in the extreme. And consequently, unbelief had become rampant. And with the death of faith, there is also the death of hope and the death of meaning in life. And that was the case in the heathen world. As one scholar has written, heathen religion has been described as a wild growth of religion upon the depraved and fallen nature of man, darkening the original consciousness of God and deifying even the irrational thoughts and utterances of men, and sanctifying not only natural but unnatural vices, and even offering those vices up to their gods as worship. This was the heathen religion, but it did not satisfy the soul of men. And so things were in a very bad way. There was no hope. There was no truth. What is truth? Said Pontius Pilate, echoing the sentiments of the entire Roman world, of all of heathenism. And so today, again, with the revival of paganism in America, we see once more people saying the same thing in 1,000 universities across America. What is truth? There is no truth, no absolute truth. They mock at the idea. But then Jesus came. Then truth incarnate was born into the world. And when Jesus came, all things were changed. The night gave way to the day, and how bright was the light that he brought, and how great was the joy that he brought to replace the despair and misery that had existed for centuries in this world. When Jesus came, all things were changed. It was joy to the world. The Lord has come, and how great indeed was that joy. And when John the apostle leaned his head upon the bosom of Jesus and later wrote those 3 short words in his epistle, they absolutely transformed the thinking of men. They were so revolutionary that the heathen world could hardly believe that any man would have had the audacity to utter such words as these. God is love. To us, an absolute commonplace. To them, a veritable revolution in thought. A God who loved us enough to give his own Son, and a Son who is God who loved us enough to give his own life for us. And so for the first time in the world, men began to love God, and the whole world was changed by that love. And not only did they love God, but they began to love one another so much so that the Roman pagans used to say, "Behold how these Christians love one another." Yes, when Jesus came, all things were changed, and the night gave way to the day, and how bright was the light that he brought. He was the light of God and became the light of men. Second night before Christmas I'd like for you to think about tonight was the night before that first real Christmas in your heart. I refer to that day when Christ was born in you. Because if Jesus were merely born in Bethlehem, that will be nothing to you. He must be born in your life as well. Do you remember that night? And surely that night too was dark. Before Christ came into your heart, you had no hope of life eternal, no assurance of what would happen to you when you died. Certainly no certain belief that your sins were forgiven. No conscious expectation that you were on your way to paradise. No real understanding of any meaning or purpose for your life. You were like the pagans of old, walking in darkness, knowing not whither you went. And when a person doesn't know where he's going, the term to describe that is lost. And that's exactly what we were. We were lost. And then Jesus came and found us. Do you remember that Christmas morning in your heart, that day that you first accepted Jesus Christ? Do you remember how different that was from the night before? The day before you accepted Christ, a day that was night and followed many days before that were night when you were lost. Do you remember when you were lost? Many here would say, "Ah, yes, I remember it all too poignantly." But let me say that some of you don't. And let's make it clear. If you don't remember when you were lost, you are. As one minister once said, the problem in America is not getting people saved. They all think they're saved already. The problem is getting them lost. Now, Jesus came to seek and save only one kind of people: lost people. If you've never been lost, you've never been saved, because Jesus doesn't save anyone else.